A banshee is not some gentle wisp of folklore. She's a harbinger of death, a vengeful spirit lurking in the shadows, waiting to tear through your peace with her blood-curdling wail. Don't let her mournful cry fool you. She's not here to comfort. Her scream rips through the night, a warning that someone in your family will soon die. Whether she appears as a hauntingly beautiful woman or a terrifying, disheveled hag, the banshee is a force of death, a symbol of grief so raw and destructive that it's carved into the very soul of Irish myth. Hear her cry and know that doom is coming. She's not just a whisper in the dark, but a brutal reminder that no one escapes the inevitable. In the shadow of the ancient Irish hills, a small village called Kilmore had been living in uneasy peace for generations. The land, though fertile, was cursed with strange happenings that no one dared speak of openly. Whispers of a banshee had haunted the area for centuries, but such tales were dismissed by most as mere superstition. That is, until the night Eowulf O'Connell, a young woman who had grown up in the village, returned to Kilmore for a camping trip with friends. Oif had left the village as a teenager, moving to Dublin for work. After hearing of her mother's sudden, unexplained death, Aoife returned to the village to settle her affairs. To find some closure, she decided to reconnect with the land that had once brought her comfort, and to revisit the small campsite by the woods where she had spent many nights as a child. It was a bitterly cold evening when Oife arrived with her friends, setting up tents by the edge of the woods. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to emerge. As they sat around a campfire, the warmth of the flames did little to ease the strange sense of unease that crept through the air. There was a thick silence, one that hummed with something otherworldly. Oaf told herself it was just the remoteness of the place, the familiar but haunting memories of her childhood. But then she heard it, a high-pitched wailing sound, eerie and sorrowful, echoing from somewhere deep within the forest. Oaf froze, her heart pounding. The sound, soft but unmistakable, sent a chill down her spine. The wail grew louder, carrying with it an unmistakable feeling of dread. Oif had heard stories from her grandmother about the banshee, a spirit whose cry foretold death. Just stories, she thought, dismissing the fear that gnawed at her. Superstitions meant to scare children. Still, Aoife couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. She excused herself from the campfire and wandered toward the woods, trying to peer through the darkness. She spotted a figure, a woman draped in tattered white robes, her long silver hair blowing wildly in the wind. The figure seemed to shimmer in the pale moonlight, a presence that both drew her in and terrified her at the same time. Oif's pulse quickened. The wail grew louder, more frantic, and the figure stood motionless, watching her with an intensity that felt like it pierced the night itself. Suddenly, the figure vanished, swallowed by the mist. The wailing continued, echoing through the woods, but Oif was no longer able to see the source. She stumbled back toward the campfire, but before she could explain herself, there was a sharp knock, no, a bang on the side of her tent. Her friends jumped in alarm, and Oif's heart nearly stopped. The sound came again, more insistent this time. She opened her tent flap, expecting the worst, but found only the bitter cold and the creeping fog rolling across the ground. On the ground by the entrance, however, was an old rune, one that Aoife had seen as a child in her grandmother's stories, a sign of death. The banshee's wail reached a fever pitch in the distance, and then suddenly stopped. It was as if the forest had taken a collective breath, waiting. Hours passed. The campfire had long since dwindled, and the darkness pressed in on them, unyielding. Oif tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched, of something waiting in the woods, gnawed at her insides. Just as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, Aoife heard a voice. It was her mother's voice. "Oife!" The voice whispered, faint but clear, as though it came from far away. "Don't let her take you." Oif bolted upright in her tent, her breath quick and shallow. The voice was gone, but the chill was more intense than before. And there, standing at the foot of her tent, was the banshee. Her face was gaunt, hollow eyes staring at Oife. Her lips twisted into an agonized grimace, her wild hair tangled as if it had been ravaged by the wind. The banshee's mouth opened wide and the wail began again, a deafening cry of sorrow and rage. Oif felt her strength fading as the banshee's gaze locked with hers. The creature's presence was suffocating, draining Awef's very life force. Yet amidst the terror, a single memory surfaced, her grandmother's warning. The Banshee is not just a messenger of death. She is a reflection of the grief that haunts the soul. Aef's mother had died too soon, and Oaf had never gotten the chance to say goodbye. The grief she had suppressed was now manifesting before her in the form of the Banshee. In that moment, Alfam understood. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the overwhelming sorrow she had long pushed aside. She wept for her mother, for the loss, for the things left unsaid. As Alfie embraced the grief, the Banshee's wail softened. The creature's form flickered like a shadow, and Alfie felt the weight on her chest lift. With a final sorrowful glance, the Banshee disappeared into the early morning mist. Alfie collapsed to her knees, exhausted but free. She had faced the wail, accepted the grief, and broken the curse. The Banshee had been a reflection of her own unresolved sorrow. By confronting it, Ofe had released both herself and the village from its torment. As the sun rose over the hills, Oifi stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. The curse had been lifted. The village and the land had found peace. But somewhere in the hills, the wail of the Banshee still lingered, waiting for the next soul to face the grief that bound her to the earth.